pages. From the thrilling pages of the DC comic,
Faster than a speeding bullet,
a myth is forged.
more powerful than a locomotive,
A hero takes flight.
able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. This amazing stranger from the planet Krypton, the Man of Steel, Superman.
Hi, folks. Welcome to this I guess we'd call it a micro edition of Superman Lives. I'm Chris Moe.
And this is Michael.
And we're doing this because we're right in the middle of Superman Reborn. And a couple of weeks ago, we said we would do this if we could, talk about where we are at this point. And, I kind of had this nagging doubt in my mind we'd be anywhere because there's been some, I don't know if it's decompression or compression, but there's been a lot of unsatisfactory expectations as far as, this is going to be revealed, and then it isn't. So here we are. We're looking at Action Comics 975. This is a double-sized issue, super-sized anniversary issue, which I thought, it's not really super-sized. And if you have not already read it, we are going to spoil it. So this is a big spoiler. And, Michael and I have been talking about this now for probably months and months.
Yeah.
And we finally find out who the mystery Clark Kent is, and the internet has a number of sites have been spoiling this, so you would hear it probably by now. You've heard it. But also talking about the implications. It's a big one, and not at all what I expected. I thought this character would, as we talked about last issue, he would show up in Superman Reborn at some point, not in this capacity. So I was right that he was the prisoner. I was wrong about the other part of this. So, Michael, let's go ahead and just dive right into the first part, because this is what's great about this issue is that it's a nice regular story that continues Superman Reborn as far as the story going forward, and then you have a backup tale by the great Paul Dini. And
Yes.
to be quite honest, I mean, I don't know how you feel. We've never talked about this guy, but I think the not-so-great Ian Churchill. Is it Ian Churchill, or is it... No. It's... yeah, it is. Yeah, never been a fan of Ian Churchill. I've always kind of got a Rob Liefeld vibe.
Oh, yeah.
I don't get it in this issue, though.
No, not at all.
So maybe he's been... Unless I'm thinking of Norm Rapmund. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Just pretend none of this is happening, kids.
It's really bad. Artists will cringe to hear me say this, but being a writer myself, I have to work to remember the writers' names and stuff like that. But yeah. Ian Churchill's the artist here on the Paul Dini story. So
Right. And I seem to remember him having kind of a Liefeld style, but it looks like maybe he's moved on from that, which is good for him and everybody else. So let's talk about the first part of the story. This short part, we'll just tell you right now, Michael and I were both spoiled beforehand. Unfortunately, I led Michael down the dark path and told him, I know who it is because I looked, and I didn't want to. It was... I just didn't have the willpower. I'd be a horrible Green Lantern. And so once I knew, Michael said, well, go ahead and tell me, and I did. So the issue is concerned, this first part by Dan Jurgens, and then, of course, the great art of Doug Monk, I believe Monkey, is... or Mank, who knows. But it is a very... I wasn't impressed with it. Long story short about the actual story, Lois and Clark have gone to the apartment of Mystery Clark, and it apparently is similar to his pre-Flashpoint apartment. And while they're there, they see food that... It reminded me of that scene in the first episode of Lois and Clark, where she goes to his apartment and she opens the cabinets and says, you eat like a kid and you have this great body,
Yeah.
And also in Byrne's Man of Steel 1, it was a neat scene too, where he hardly has any food in the pantry, if I remember correctly, and then he's got all these weights, and she wonders how he keeps up with that physique, but the weights are too light. So it kind of called back to that for me. That was neat, and Jurgens made, in my opinion, Superman seem a little dumb. And I don't know if it's because he was supposed to be confused. I don't know if it was just it was not executed well. So what happens is they're confronted by Mystery Clark. Then Superman gets a little physical with him, and Mystery Clark gets physical back, starts accusing him of having forgotten him. And this stuff we got a taste of last issue at the end. And then he changes shape a number of times. Villain to villain to villain, and we find out that he is none of these people. He is, in fact, Mr. Mxyzptlk. So, Michael, first of all, let's talk about, before the reveal itself, let's talk about what did you feel about the Jurgens build up to that moment?
The narrative in this issue, yeah. Well, I mean, I felt it was understandable. I mean, I don't mind, Superman getting a little handsy with this guy because he took his son, I mean, that's, if there's anything that's going to make Superman, kind of crack a little bit, that's going to be it, and we've come to really invest in John too. So we're, invested in this moment as well. I tried my best going through here to consider how it would be if I didn't know the reveal, and I was really just wrapped up in the suspense as the characters would be. So I think the big problem, I didn't mind what happened in terms of the reveal. I think the biggest problem in this issue has been the problem for me in the entire Jurgens run, is that the issues themselves haven't really contained a coherent a cohesive story arc in themselves. They've just been the little snapshots of the greater narrative. And I know it's a long-term story, and it'll be a wonderful trade one day, and stuff like that. But it's maddening to read. I've always preferred issues to have a little bit more of a natural arc to them, even in light of the larger story. So I think that's what it annoyed me so much. It was just like, really, this is you gave us 2 minutes of the tale.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and we, like you said, we've seen that the whole time. I feel that that's better somehow in Superman, although even those issues, and I guess that's just the nature of the industry now, but they've all felt very light. Like, they're an appetizer, and I want the meal. And like you said, I mean, I guess when we read the trade, it's going to feel a lot better. I don't know that I'll have the time to go back and read the trade. So for me, it's like, this is that one time. I think for these big stories, I'll probably, if I get the trade, certainly I'll go back and read the individual issues. So I think I agree completely with you on that. It's just not satisfying. You're right that knowing going in did spoil it, unlike DC Rebirth #1, which we knew the whole plot of that, but that was still so well done, so well executed. But of course, that was a standalone. It was setting up a lot of things, but it was its own story. So, and I think Jeff Johns, as much as I love Dan Jurgens, Jeff Johns is I guess it would be accurate to say he's a modern writer. And I think Jurgens, one of the things I notice is he's still writing very much like he used to 20 years ago. So, yeah. But he is, Lois and Clark was great. And I've felt there's been a bit of a diminishing in quality since then. But again, now he's part of a larger whole. So we find out too that he this Mr. Mxyzptlk changes shape. He becomes Lex Luthor. I think it's very important to note, and I didn't notice until I saw this pointed out online. He's wearing the pre-Flashpoint Lex Luthor armor.
Yeah, that's what I noticed too. Yeah,
and that's very interesting. And it isn't. It would be one thing if he was wearing the Silver Age or the Bronze Age armor, and you'd say, okay, it's just a callback to that. But it's very specifically pre-Flashpoint. We see Bizarro. It's the pre-Flashpoint Bizarro. It's not whatever is running around these days. It is, of course, an altered uniform because God forbid that they draw the trunks.
I was going to say that too. You even see the line of the trunks, and they just could not bring themselves on a Bizarro for all things just to put the freaking red trunks on.
Right, that bugged me tremendously, and I don't know why the belt has to be segmented. And I mean, come on, it should be yellow.
Yeah.
Then a very, very much the pre-Flashpoint Brainiac, who I loved, and designed by Gary Frank. And then Mongol, who I don't think we've seen, and then Gary Frank's Parasite, and then pre-Flashpoint Hank Henshaw, which we know is going to play into the stories going forward, and then finally pre-Flashpoint Doomsday, and then the big reveal. So this idea that Mxyzptlk wants to make them forget John is kind of showing us what happened in the last issue, their whole farmhouse being erased, and then John himself disappearing. So how do you think that's going to play out, Michael? Is that some kind of, not meta context, but is it some kind of way of saying we're going to have to adjust the timeline going forward, because how will we reconcile those 10 years where they were in hiding into this new timeline that we know is coming, right? The hence the title, Superman Reborn. Is this the way of saying we've got to erase that past to reestablish it as whatever comes after?
You know, I don't really know if they're going to erase it. I think they're going to connect it somehow. I do have to say, though, like you, I was not I did not even remotely think that Mystery Clark was going to be Mr. Mxyzptlk. No. But it makes sense now, because all of the other theories you and I were talking about sounded good, but I couldn't understand how they would really work with all of the details that have already been given. For example, when Superman takes this Mystery Clark to his fortress and has all these tests run on him and the lie detector and stuff like that, the Clark tells him his own past, not New 52 Superman's past, but our Superman's past. That's the life he'd lived. So that really made it confusing for me, but that makes perfect sense now if this is Mr. Mxyzptlk who's only known that, that pre-crisis Superman. And I also like the symmetry of it is that Mr. Mxyzptlk, they go in great pains in this issue to point out that, he's a villain and he's very dangerous, but he hasn't been evil in the past. He's always been playful. This is, always kind of his. I mean, it's horrible what he does, but these are, him at play, and he doesn't really understand or, think of the world as autonomous human beings. There's playthings, and there's in the best Mr. Mxyzptlk stories, there's always been a little I don't want to say affection, but just a little lightheartedness, banter between Superman and him. He's trying to trick him and everything. So there's this childlike quality to Mr. Mxyzptlk that I've always appreciated, and I think the issue did well bringing that out. Specifically, the art. I just want to mention one thing with the art on the page right before he starts transforming, right before we see the full spread of Lex Luthor and stuff like that. We get that one sliver of a panel of like him in mid transformation, and he's going from Clark, and you see this just open-eyed, childlike rage, and the forehead is large. You even see that kind of, that's often, children are often drawn with larger foreheads, and you just see this little bit of childlike in that rage in the eye. And then if you juxtapose that with Mr. Mxyzptlk's actual reveal of him being himself, I mean, he looks, on the one hand, he's an old man, but on the one hand, he's just a big child. And I thought that was such a cool symmetry. Hey, I'm taking your son because you care more about him than me, and it's perfect character motivation, exactly what I would expect from him. Let us care about John so much, let us love that character, and then have this character who we don't hate, but come and kind of fight for. So it is, like you were saying, it is kind of like things we've loved about the character in the past and things we've come to love about his story now clashing together, and they've got to work themselves out somehow.
Right. Yeah, and that, I guess, is going to be it's such a swerve, because I guess I really thought, and it was my mistake, that this would be revelatory of something larger with Flashpoint. Now, we don't know, and not Flashpoint, I'm sorry, with Rebirth, but I really thought we were going to see, okay, well, is Dr. Manhattan involved in this? Who is affecting the timeline in this way, and kind of retconning things? And it makes sense that it would be a fifth dimensional imp who can do anything, and it's perfect to use him. So it makes perfect sense. I've read online, people have said the clues have been there the whole time. Well, okay, I think that's convenient to say. I mean, but as you go back and look, they are pretty much there. I just, when he was suggested in the very first issue of Reborn, with all of the other candidates, I thought, okay, well, this is great, because I really think he's the guy that escaped, and I was right on that. But I never, like you said, never thought he'd also be Clark. So why he became Clark makes great sense, and he had to escape from Dr. Oz. Wow.
I always say that too. I know.
Yeah, I know. I want to escape for him too. I can't stand his show. But no, so that brings us to the Paul Dini backup, which explains why Mxyzptlk is doing this. It's not only is it just because of John, but he's been through a trauma. And my worry when I found out that it was Mxyzptlk, I always flash back to the horrible stuff done by Alan Moore in the Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, because that to me was just an awful. I've been fun, and I've been a trickster for 1,000 years, or however many millennia. Let me go ahead now and be evil. Yeah. We don't need to see that, and I'm real cautious that doesn't. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. So we see this first bit of art here on that first page of the Dini part, and it's very interesting because you have a Golden Age Superman with the Golden Age Mr. Mxyzptlk. Then you have the Silver Age with Superman having his arms crossed, and then above that is that great post-crisis issue of the Daily Planet being brought to life, and and that is a great. I have that issue, and I always thought that was a great visual. So it's heavily suggesting that Mr. Mxyzptlk and perhaps Superman, that there's this continuity of pre-crisis and post-crisis and then now. Now that we don't know that for sure, but there's even this meta idea that he is, because as he tells John, what this thing between your dad and I is bigger than anything you can imagine, and that we see the shot of the animated Mxyzptlk and the animated Superman. Yes, so that is great stuff. So the idea that this crosses into other parts of the multiverse, and that's, I think, the biggest implication, which I do want to talk about. But let's talk first, Mr. Oz, this guy. Any ideas? Does this reveal anything to you about him? I mean, I still think Ozymandias, because I just think, how can you not, how can you use that name and not be Ozymandias? But I think it's incredibly interesting that, at least in this realm where this Mr. Oz is, he's more powerful than Mxyzptlk, or at least able to nullify that power. And that's pretty freaking powerful. So I guess if they really are going meta and out with this, I mean, that would make sense. Really kind of go into the I am the storyteller, or I am affecting the stories being told, kind of aspect would, be able to affect the most powerful character in them, like Mr. Mxyzptlk. But I don't know. And I don't know about hints as to who he is. It just really impressed me with his role or in position with other characters. Right, because the implication is that if he can do this, and he's got Doomsday, which is also a big deal, and Tim Drake, although he's non-powered, the implications are this guy can do quite a number of things, and he, has felt not that interesting to me at certain times. I mean, yes, there's been a mystery, but I haven't felt that he was of his own very powerful. And of course, Ozymandias doesn't have any powers. Yeah. Now, if I remember in Watchmen, didn't he somehow take the power of of Dr. Manhattan at some point, or I don't remember. It's fuzzy.
I know he did some. I mean, he of course made it seem like Dr. Manhattan had been the enemy there, attacking Earth. I don't remember if he actually was able to acquire his power, though.
Okay,
I don't know. It's been a while since I've read it.
Yeah, me too. And I'll have to read up on that. But I thought I had read. I have a vague memory of him. Maybe I'm crossing it with the movie. I mean, I know in the movie he made it look as if he could go rogue, and so instead of
that's right. I'm speaking from the movie. In the comic book, it was the alien. That's right.
The alien. Yeah,
that's right.
And,
sorry.
No, they run together for me because...
Yeah, me too.
So whatever it is that this guy is, we've just upped the game as far as what he's able to do. I mean, Doomsday was one thing, but to be able to do this with a guy who can manipulate reality, that's tremendous. And he tells Mxyzptlk that events pertaining to the Man of Steel are transpiring on a course I alone have set. There's no room for deviation. No random element must be allowed to derail what has been put into play. This tells us he didn't make the New 52 Superman. Well, not necessarily, but it certainly heavily suggests he didn't. And that whatever these events are, he is behind them. And he's got something. He's got some kind of reason to do this to Superman. What it is, no idea. So
it makes me think of your previous thing you said one time, that perhaps Dr. Manhattan is behind the New 52 and New 52 Superman, and Mr. Oz, Ozymandias is the one trying to bring back the classic to combat Dr. Manhattan for some reason.
That's a possibility. That is an idea. Yeah, I think if it is Oz, this could be that he's building an army, and would be great to. I mean, you would want somebody like Mxyzptlk to go up against a god, which is basically what we see with Dr. Manhattan. Now, there is some contradiction. I know a lot of websites have mentioned that this is not the Mxyzptlk of the New 52 that we saw in Morrison's run, and he's very much a secondary character in that arc. It's actually more about his girlfriend and then Vindictivix. So a lot of speculation, is that going to come into play? And I think what we're going to find out in this next issue is that maybe he is, and that was just him taking another form, because it looks like, based on the cover, which, spoiler for anybody that didn't hear us talk about this last time, the cover has been revealed for Gary Frank's variant. The mystery villain behind the New 52 Superman is Mxyzptlk. So did he make him? Did he manipulate him? Did he change him? We know in Morrison's arc that it's made very clear that Vindictivix changed who Superman would have become by killing the Kents. Mm-hmm. And so he still ended up being Superman to an extent, but he was a different Superman. So does that have something to do? Perhaps we'll find that out going forward. So let's talk about just this idea that now Mxyzptlk is established as in the same way, I think, of the New Gods. What we know from Morrison's work in Final Crisis, and I think it was established in other places, these are characters that when you have Crisis on Infinite Earths, you have 0 Hour, blah, 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 etc., they don't get changed. Mm-hmm. They may look different, but they are not changing because they're immutable, they're gods. Yeah. Now we know that Mxyzptlk can actually just, with the snap of a finger, travel the multiverse, and he has, and because he talks about this in the issue. We also mm-hmm. know he doesn't change across universes, so that implies there's one Mr. Mxyzptlk, or at least that's how I took it. So that's very interesting to me, and it made me wonder: will he have some bigger role in all of Rebirth going forward?
I can't imagine he wouldn't. I mean, he's a hugely powerful character, and he's apparently very crucial in this very crucial moment of Superman's continuity here. So he's got to be a player. I just, I think it'd be poor integrated storytelling if he's not.
Right. Absolutely. And so this is a huge swerve, again, because we just never would have thought, he's at all involved. And then now he may be involved in the end game of Rebirth in the next year, because we're now about to reach the 1 year point and go into phase 2. We know there's going to be a big summer event. He does tell John, I'm the only one who sees the big picture, the only one who can pop from world to world. Mm-hmm. And that's very interesting too, seeing the big picture. So Jurgens did an interview, and I don't want to accuse this guy because I have a lot of respect for him, but he told the interviewer, I think it's Newsarama, that he had the idea for this to be Mr. Mxyzptlk. And while I don't necessarily think that would be impossible, this has Jeff Johns written all over it.
Yeah.
Don't you think that Jeff Johns is the one looking at all this going, who's behind this? Mr. Mxyzptlk.
Absolutely, because with Jeff Johns' run, that pre-Crisis or pre-New 52 run, pre-Flashpoint run, I should say, that was all about taking everything we loved about Silver Age Superman and placing it in a modern context that didn't tarnish it, didn't rough it up and make it modern, in that respect or whatever. So and this smacks of that, definitely.
Absolutely, yep. So this backup story, what do you have any thoughts other than anything I've?
Yeah, well, I liked what you said about I too at the end of the Jurgens story was a little concerned that Mixie had kind of lost it and turned evil. I didn't like that, but this kind of Cap-On story, especially seeing him interact with John, kind of returns it for me a little bit to the he's let's be friends, John. He's still dangerous, like we said, and he's still the villain here, but he's I don't know, it added a little bit more of that childish polish to it for me, which I appreciated. And I also just need to say, and I mean this literally, thank God for Paul Dini. I mean, it seems like so many writers who I still think are wonderful writers and capable of turning out wonderfully iconic stuff have just let me down at some point, or have just kind of betrayed me at some point. I felt just mortified when Bruce Timm, was announced to be returning to the DC animated universe, and he ended up doing, the Gods and Monsters Injustice kind of thing or whatever. And it was just A2 Bruce, really. But Paul Dini, to my knowledge, he has never let me down. Everything the man has done has always been quality, to my knowledge anyway. Maybe somebody knows of something he's done that's completely, if you do, don't tell me. But I'm just really glad to see him back.
Yes, I actually, on the Comic Book Resources board, started a thread called Let's Get Some Money Together to get Paul Dini working at DC Comics. And I actually had a couple of guys there saying, it doesn't work that way. You don't have to raise money, man. And I was like, it's called humor, for one thing.
Exactly.
But for another, point is, I'd be willing to pay him myself somehow. I'll sell all my back issues because he has shown time and again, and he's not a Superman guy, but that's the genius of it. He worked on Superman the animated series and has admitted in interviews, and we know Tim is all Batman, to the point of, I think in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, he kind of made it that, oh look, let me do another episode where Superman has to be saved by Batman.
Yeah.
Dini, though, didn't do that. He didn't really diminish Superman, and he did a lot of the writing on the animated series. So I feel like he has an awareness of and a respect for him. And I need to go ahead and thank Michael publicly for this. Michael, for my birthday, sent me Paul Dini's excellent Dark Knight, A True Batman story, which is very moving, and I started reading it, Michael. So thank you very much for that, by the way.
Oh, no problem.
And it is fantastic. Paul Dini, the art is by Eduardo Risso, and man, it's beautiful. And in it, you're getting a kind of semi-autobiographical, or I guess it's all autobiographical story of Paul Dini as he grew up. He's very much one of us, a geek who was bullied and couldn't really connect with a lot of his peers, but he would escape to the world of the imaginary, and comics were the primary thing for him. And there's a great image of him coming home from school after a horrible day, goes into his room, and all of his imaginary friends, quote unquote, from comics and cartoons are there waiting for him. And
that's amazing. One
of them is Superman with his arms crossed, and Batman's nowhere to be seen. Of course, the whole thing is about how much Batman is his favorite character, but Superman is there. So I think he has a real love for Superman, and I think that's clear here. And so I would just, nothing against Tomasi, nothing against Jurgens. Create a third title and give it to Paul Dini. Even here's an idea I had the other day. Legion of Superheroes, this is the guy to do it.
Absolutely.
He would be tremendous, So he saves this issue, because if this was all this was, and then you got some pinups or something in the back, I would have burned something. I would have been very angry. So thankfully we got more than that, and we have just what I want to talk about, I guess, here at the end. We have this very tortured Mxyzptlk, right? Who is so he's we don't know how long he's been in that prison, and it could have been years and years. It probably has been years. Could it have been longer? Time for him is meaningless. But I even
kind of felt sorry for him, sitting there crying out for Superman to save him for so long.
Right, I did too. Yeah, it reminded me of the song from Smallville, "Somebody Save Me."
Yeah,
and yet he never comes. And we have this great, I don't know how to take it, but we have this this idea in this image of the whole Superman family all together without me, my family. And you have the modern Superman, Lois, and then John, but then you have a Kurt Swan Superman, Kurt Swan Lois. And I know people on message boards have been telling me, well, you're wrong, it's Superboy. Yeah, but I think it's Clark Kent Jr. I think it's supposed to be the son. The idea that this is a universal idea that there's a son of Superman.
Exactly.
And he's the only character that sees himself as a part of the family. And so you feel his pain, and you also, at the same time, you hope that he won't hurt John. And then we get that great, I love the name that he had for him. He couldn't say Purple Hat, so he called him Ruppeltat.
That's wonderful.
Which was just genius, And he figures out I have to say that name backwards to go home, and he goes home, but then Mick says, I never said you were going to get to stay home. And so that's going to lead us into Superman 19, which is called Mixie's Revenge. So what is this revenge going to take? What form? I mean, how is he getting revenge on Superman, do you think?
I don't know exactly. I'll postulate that or kind of talk that in a second, but I just want to those last couple panels. That's pure brilliant Mixie when he's told John, no, you can't stay home, and he's trying to play, I think, go fish with him or something. He says, kid, I'm what happens when the cosmos turns itself into a funny little man in a purple hat and gets kicked to the curb for trying to be human. Now, any fives? I mean, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. That's brilliant. And so in terms of that, and so we know what his motivation is, we know what his rage is. I don't know. I don't really think he's truly going to try to cease John's existence, because he's sitting there with John trying to kind of earn his affection a little bit on some level, I think it seems like. So I don't know. I hope that it ends with Superman somehow still being heroic, but somehow being able to show a little affection to Mixie. I know that maybe that's naive, but I think that would be a wonderful way to kind of assuage him enough to fool him into saying his name backwards or whatever.
Right. Yeah, I hope so too, because I get the feeling in past issues and past times in the character's history, there's been a mutual affection. At least Superman has been relieved at times to have it be Mxyzptlk and not Doomsday or Luthor trying to kill him, because Mix is not trying to kill him. And so, I think there's the nuisance level. But I also think it's important to point out, Superman was a little busy, assuming the timelines are matching up. We don't really know how long Mxyzptlk was gone. But Superman was in another universe for a year, and then he was here and in hiding. And I wondered, it was never really spelled out to me, did he, as he was telling John these stories about Purple Hat, did he not want to say Mixie's name because he didn't want to summon him?
Huh.
And if that's the case, then is that something that Mixie knows? And as a result of that, maybe that's where his resentment's coming from.
Oh, maybe.
So I don't know, and I think maybe they left that unclear. I hope that isn't something they just overlooked, but I can't imagine that it is. So at the very end, we get this great back in the Mixie page, which tells you how to pronounce his name, or which I thought was great, because I've always said Mxyzptlk, which somewhere Mark Waid gave somebody a lesson. I remember it very, very clearly. He said, "This is how you say it." So yes, sir, Mr. Waid. I've always gone with Mxyzptlk, but you have all these other variations that you're being told by DC Comics, call him whatever you want. So I thought that was really neat. And then this just tells you all of his abilities, his known origin. Kind of like the Joker, because under known origin we see, is he a heartbroken fifth-dimensional wizard running from a vengeful sorcerer, or just a bored demigod? Now that's referring to the Morrison New 52 mix. For now, Mixie isn't saying. So his history we don't know. This may give us an origin, like Morrison tried to do. This may give us an origin definitively going forward for Mxyzptlk. So not at all what I expected for this issue, but overall I would give it a 10, because I think that Paul Dini saves it. Had we not had that in there, I would have had to give it like a 4. That's being generous. Any closing thoughts on there?
Well, I did want to mention briefly, I sent you the image of Superwoman, that most recent issue of Superwoman, the Lana Lang, Superwoman having the kind of electric Superman powers right now. That recent issue is a Superman Reborn tie-in, it says on the cover. And it contains this moment. Lana Lang is in a coma at this point, so they're not showing their hand completely. She's been in a coma. She's also been, as these powers are sort of killing her, she's been hallucinating and seeing, the New 52 Lois that she had known for so long. Of course, she knows our Lois now in real life as well, but she's been hallucinating, seeing that Lois. And then now in her coma, she sees New 52 Superman and New 52 Lois. And she continuously asks them, what is it so important about you two? Why are you two the center of these universes? Why didn't you never love me like that, like you did her? And to my knowledge, Superman and Lois were never really in love or an item in the New 52. So she's automatically talking about how her memory's being changed, and and certain things are disappearing in her mind and other things are replacing them. So we're seeing, kind of her almost crash back into her pre-Flashpoint, self and memories as Lana almost a little bit. And then the New 52 Lois says to her at one point, "We're not important. It's our son that's important." And Lana says, "But no, that's not. You guys don't have the son. That's the other one." And then Lana realizes for a second, oh my gosh, maybe she kind of sees these all things crashing together. Now all of that's in context of her being in a coma and possibly dreaming, possibly having visions. So they haven't showed their hand completely. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, but it was a really cool, another ingredient to throw in the mix.
Right, and I'm looking at the issue here, and she says, "Oh my God, I understand now. I get it." Well, what is it she gets? We are not going to get it just yet. But she says, "Just tell me one thing. When all this with the universe is settled, what we had as kids, will I remember that?" And then Clark says, New 52 Superman says, "You taught me how to love." So that I thought was really nice. I love what they do with Lana here, making her such an integral character, because she's a great character, you know, and to bring her back into the comics. I mean, Kurt Busiek was doing great stuff with her before that went south when he left the title. He made her the head of LexCorp and all this. So, yeah, this seems to suggest that somehow New 52 Superman and Lois are the same as pre-Flashpoint, right? I mean, and I have no idea how that works. From what I've read online, there's this red energy, which has powered Lana and has apparently also powered Lois when she was Superwoman. And so there are a lot of folks online saying, well, this is where Superman Blue, Superman Red is going to come back in.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe. But I think it's important to note that Mystery Clark, on one of the covers, when he's fighting Superman, which never actually happens in that issue, I think that was the last issue of Action, he's got blue energy around him. So now we know he was Mixus-Pitalik, so that maybe isn't going to be the route. I don't know. I just, you know, looking at next issue, I hope that we find out, okay, what the heck is going on, you know, with the New 52 Superman. So any other hopes for that next issue? Anything else you really...
Yeah, at this point, I've kind of learned my lesson about saying, well, this is clearly what's going to happen, or this is going to happen, you know, because it goes one way or the other. I like you. I really hope that we get more of the story and not just a, you know, snapshot of it again. I understand that they need to span it their event, but, you know, I hope the story bears up under that and we get a good amount of information.
Right, because you know, Dan Jurgens, again in that interview he did with Newsarama, he's asked, what's coming up now that we've had this very big revelation of Mr. Mixus-Pitalik. He says, I'm pulling it up right now just so I can not misquote him. He says, we have 2 more chapters to go, and I can't emphasize this enough. Major period developments period. So here's my problem with that. You can tell me that all you want, Dan, but then I read the solicits for next month, and I know that you're stretching it out into the 4 issues with Aftermath. Yeah. So that really frustrates me, because is it going to be Aftermath, Dust Settles? Then we'll, you know, is that coming after? We have solicits through May, and it looks like this stuff's kind of starting to move forward. But come on, we don't know who Mr. Oz is until April, which leads me to believe that he's someone related to the Rebirth overall. I mean, we're going to finally figure out if he is Ozymandias, but major.
Maybe this is the kind of the tension arriving between them. They've increased the output. You get 2 issues a month now, but maybe in terms of planning and development, they still want the story to last X amount of months or whatever. So maybe that's part of it.
Maybe so. Yeah. And I guess that makes sense. You know, I mean, we're looking at it from being very long-term readers when you didn't have twice monthly shipping, and you had more meat on a comic book than you do now, you know. One other idea that occurred to me and that I just want to mention here, this New 52 Superman as one of the Superman Red, Blue, that whole thing, still going around in various places. And it occurred to me that story never, as we've talked about before, never had a resolution. Nobody knows who was behind it or why it happened, what caused him to split. You know, well, we know that Cyborg Superman caused him to split, but we don't know why that happened to begin with. We speculate he had lost his powers, he got them back, then he turned into this energy being. So I wonder, is it going to be revealed that Mr. Mixus-Pitalik was involved in that? He caused that pre-Flashpoint, and now we're going to find out he was behind certain things.
And since we've got Mr. Mixus-Pitalik back from all those different, you know, time periods, are they going to reference the Golden Age split of Superman, the red and blue? That
right? Yeah,
you remember that one? Yeah, yes. I don't know.
That's possibly he was behind both. You know, maybe he splits Superman every few years, and you know, this idea this is the same Superman, he's just evolving through time, which I don't think they'll go that far, but it's very interesting. I would like to see that connection, that maybe his revenge is going back in time. So he's mad at Superman, so he goes back before Flashpoint, and he does Superman Red and Blue. He's like, let me split you up into 2 people. We'll see how you like it, you know? And so I don't know. Again, I've been so
Those are great ideas.
Yeah, I thank you. I don't know if they're going to be anywhere near. But I'm looking at the Superman 19 cover, which is coming out Wednesday, and there's our Flashpoint Superman, pre-Flashpoint, with blue energy and New 52 with red energy. So on the cover. So who knows?
Yeah,
we'll know Wednesday. So that third part comes out on Wednesday, and then we'll be back, I imagine, in when Superman Reborn wraps up, to talk about the whole story, and then to look at Aftermath, which I wish wasn't happening, but of course I am glad, because I think it's gonna set up the Superman Revenge Squad, and I'm excited to see that coming up, and I'd love to see Lex Luthor go back to being Lex Luthor. So
yes,
I think it's time for that.
I do want to just give a shout out real quick to those post serial that event where I didn't know about it until I heard you talk about it on the big show. But the event where they've got the Rebirth Justice League is appearing across certain serial boxes, and they're 4-part comic books in these boxes. So as you were saying, Chris, I'm privileged on the East Coast. They tend to roll out things first here, and I've got all of the boxes except for Wonder Woman. But I've learned, so the panorama is kind of coming together in the back of the boxes. They're lovely. But I've learned that the comics there's no rhyme and reason to what comic you're going to get in what box. So you just have to keep buying until you get all 4. And I did read the first one, and it was incredible. It was so much fun. Jerry Ordway penciled it, like I told you. And the first story, which is kind of a standalone story of comic 1, deals with Mr. Mxyzptlk, and even Batmite makes a showing. So incredible Silver Age fun with the DC Rebirth Justice League. So definitely check that out if you can.
Yes, I'm waiting. We've already been to 3 or 4 stores, and my children just kind of shake their heads like, Daddy usually runs to the toy aisle. Now he's running to the cereal aisle. Why? And I showed them the pictures, like, this is why. And they're like, we don't care. We don't understand. I said, but it's, I actually tried to tell my wife, I said, let me just explain something here to you. 2 words, Jerry Ordway. Now, I know that means nothing to you, but this guy's a god when it comes to art and understanding Superman, and, oh, man. And she just kind of this glazed look. Kind of like I get when somebody tells me that I really should like anything by Zack Snyder. So
exactly.
I was like, well, it's fair. So yeah, well, that's awesome, and I'm jealous, but I'm hoping to go get those too. My wife didn't really seem to be too excited with me buying all those boxes of cereal, but she doesn't need to know. So I definitely want those issues. A few years ago, that happened where they released these excellent little Justice League issues in boxes of cereal, and I want to say Jurgens did some of the art. He did the covers on those, and this was way before Flashpoint, and those were great. So I love this idea, and I love that background. Is it as good as it looks? Like it
really is. And unfortunately, I did family size boxes except for the Batman one that's normal size. So I've got to get a family size Batman as well to really make it all fit together. But it really is. It looks enormous, wonderful. So
I wonder if they'll ever release it as a poster. Probably.
That would be great.
Yeah. Then you wouldn't have to hold the boxes together somehow on your shelf. I want to plug our new podcast. I think we should definitely do that. Which we are now 2 episodes in, although the second hasn't been released, which is, of course, Holy Roman Fanboys, The Geek Shall Inherit the Earth. Michael, you want to give a little blurb about that?
Yeah, so this is a religious podcast. So if that's your thing, but Chris and I'm entering into the Catholic Church. Chris is a Catholic, and our friend Big Al, who is a co-host on Iconicast, is also Catholic. And we just through me coming into the church and just wanted to talk about. Of course, I can't separate my geekiness from my spirituality, and I don't think you'd have to. Right. So we just been talking about all the conversations, and eventually it just rolled out into a podcast where we're going to look at geek culture and new movies, new comics, or whatever. Kind of through a Catholic lens, and we had a lot of fun with it. That last episode was just really showed me what this could be. It was even bigger than I thought. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well.
Absolutely, I love it. I love that I get to talk to you guys more, and I love that because I, as I've said before, I think here too on this show, I don't have any friends here who, really know half of what I know or care at all. Yeah. I have a few guys I got into comics, which I have to tell this story because it's Superman related. 92. Death of Superman, John Bogdanove comes to Lafayette, Louisiana. I think I've told you this story. But he comes and he's signing at one of the comic shops here, and I get in line, and I've got some of his back issues, and I know who he is, and I know his son's named Kal-El. I know he loves Superman that much, and I know he's on Man of Steel. And my 2 Yahoo friends who got into comics because of me, they're like, oh, I don't know who this guy is. Yeah, I'll get him to sign my comic. Yay! And and so I had the trade this was my second copy of the trade of the Death of Superman, some individual issues, and he was going to sign them. He drew a sketch of Superman, a profile, on the backing boards for both of their editions of the Death of Superman. He just signed mine.
Oh, no.
Didn't draw anything for me at all. So, and I being, very, very nervous as it was, I mean, I was approaching him as if he was the Pope. So I was not going to say, well, why in the hell did, So I've asked them in the 25 years since, I'm like, so when are you going to give me these? And my one friend is like, I gave all that to my cousin. And I said, you're dead to me. And then my other friend, he said, I know where they are, but, I'm not giving them away. And I said, you're also dead to me. I hope it's worth it. I hope it's worth it that you lose my friendship because you won't give me these comics.
Oh, that's funny.
It's worth it to me. So anyway, John Bogdanove, if you're listening, Chris Moe, you can get my address, and I'd love just a sketch. I'll pay you for it, But it was so funny because my friend Kenny, who's the guy who, one of the guys, sent me a birthday image. He put it on my Facebook wall, and it's Batman by John Bogdanove. So I texted him and I said, did you get him to draw that too for you while you were in line getting the sketch? And he said, yeah, I did. So anyway, I had to share that. I know if you don't know who John Bogdanove is,
shame on you.
Shame on you. And he is an artistic genius. His range is amazing. Go pick up his issues of Zero Hour, where he drew every iteration of Batman and Superman on the covers as they were all kind of meeting each other, from different timelines. And he did Neil Adams, he did Frank Miller, he did the animated series. It was tremendous. So he's great. But, well, all right. That is all we have for you. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back with another Superman Lives in 2 weeks. No matter what, don't forget to look up, because Superman lives.
See you next time.
Superman Lives can be found on YouTube, iTunes, the Superman Podcast Network at supermanpodcastnetwork.com, and on the podcast's Facebook page, Superman Lives Podcast. Send feedback, suggestions, and questions to hosts Chris Moe and Michael Kreitzer at supermanlivespodcast@gmail.com. All music featured in the Superman Lives broadcast is the intellectual property of Warner Brothers. Superman and all related characters are the intellectual property of DC Comics, a division of DC Entertainment. Superman Lives is intended solely for the purpose of entertainment and does not in any way profit from its production or content. Superman Lives is a production of Big Show Studios and Iconic Superman on Facebook.